Welcome to a new episode. Today we're gonna open back E and it's a suspension. Back E is a suspension, and in back E we find the suspension arm, the aluminium suspension holder, the plastic eccentrics to change the roll centers, hinge pin, and the shims to change the wheelbase. First we're gonna prepare the suspension arm. This is the rear arm. I'm gonna take out the plastic from the mold and take a knife and take out all the little bits of plastic to make it smooth. First I will put the downstop screws inside the arm, and the default setting is about 2 mm. First I will prepare the arm and I will install the aluminium suspension plates, and it's a whole new design right here. With the aluminium suspension plates you can change the position of the lower shock. We have different plates to change the lower shock position on the suspension arm. And with a 10 mm set screw you tie the suspension plate into the arm. I will do the same for the rear arm. Put the suspension plate inside and with the set screw you tight it. The default setting for the suspension plate in the front arm is 0.4 outside. The default setting in the rear arm is 0. Now install the hinge pin on the suspension arm and check if it moves freely. Now I will put the suspension together with the arm, the hinge pin, the aluminium lower suspension holder and the eccentric bushing. Using different eccentric bushing, fine adjustments of toe in, roll center and track width can be obtained. For this car I will use the initial position, the middle ones. And this is how you put them in. Now I will put the wheelbase shims on both sides 1 mm and put on the aluminium suspension holders. Now I will install the suspension arm on the car. After installing the suspension arm, check if it moves freely. The suspension arm can now be easily mounted onto the suspension blocks by using M3 x 8 mm screw here and here. With this system you can easily change the toe-in angle, roll center or track width in a couple of minutes time. A small trick when the suspension arm doesn't move freely is to hit it a little bit with a screwdriver. And check now how fast you can assemble the suspension on the car. So the assembly of the suspension arms is done. And check if they work freely. Next up is the assembly of back F. In back F we almost come to a close and we're gonna finish the transmission and we're gonna build the front and rear drive shafts, and we're gonna build them onto the front steering knuckle and the rear upright, and afterwards we're gonna install the front and rear roll bars, and we will have some camber links to be finished as well. We start with the assembly of the drive shafts, and therefore I use ultra joint grease from SMJ, and I will take a little bit of grease and I put it gently into the drive shaft. Take the set screw, put the aluminium bushing inside the drive shaft, take the wheel axle and take the 2 mm pin and tight it gently. Check now if the drive shaft moves freely into the wheel axle. Now put on the blade that goes into the rear differential outdrive. Now the assembly of the front double joint. Use again a lot of grease inside the drive shaft. Also put some grease on top. Do that the same with the wheel axle. Using grease will increase the lifetime of the drive shaft. Now take the aluminium center case and lock it with a 1.6mm pin. Take the other side and also here put it. Now install the G-clip. Can be simply done by your hand. Check if everything works free. After that's done, put the blade onto the drive shaft like this. So the assembly of the drive shafts is done. Now I prepare the rear upright and the front steering knuckle. Initial setting is a 2mm shim with a long ball end. Place the set screw. In the kit, the rear upright comes with a hard version, but as an option we also have graphite. Now I will prepare the steering knuckle and I will make some thread in it. I do that so the screw goes straight into the steering knuckle. Also new on our car is the set screw to limit the steering angle right here. And as you can see, the set screw is sticking out a little bit, and by changing this you can limit your steering angle. A good initial setup is around 10mm. Now I will install the bump steer shim, and initially setup is 2mm. Now the assembly of the drive shaft on the rear upright, and here I use the big bearings, 4mm thick. Put the drive shaft in, put a 10mm pin, 5mm wheel hex, and tight gently. And check if you have a little bit of play and it runs free. For the front steering knuckle, we use a 4mm thick bearing outside, but a 3mm thick bearing inside. Install the front double joint, put a pin, put a 5mm wheel hex and tight it gently. And that's the assembly of the drive shaft. Next up is the assembly of the caster block onto the steering knuckles. And first I have to take out the plastic and make it a little bit smooth. As you can see, the caster block has a L and a R, which is for left and right. Now I will put in the bushing, up and down. Take the drive shaft, and first I will tight it with an 8mm screw in the bottom. Don't tight it yet. Take the ball end with a 1mm shim, that's the initial setup. Never over tight it, and check if the steering knuckle can move freely into the caster block, and also check the side play. Now the assembly of the camber links front and rear, and first I will make some thread in the ball joints so the turnbuckle can be easily screwed to the ball end. The initial setting for the camber link length is about 55.5mm in the front and 53.5mm in the rear. Of course this can be different when a different track width or camber is used. So now the assembly of the four corners of the car, but first we'll put the ball ends, the short ball ends, on top of the bulkhead, and initial setting is 2mm shim, front and rear. For the front we use the short pin and tied it gently, never over tight this set screw. Now I will put some SMJ grease on the blade on both sides and put it in the spool out drive, and I will put the camber link on top. One thing I always do with the camber links is the turnbuckle has a line, and I always put them on the same side. That means if I have to open the camber or close the camber, I always go the same direction. Assembly of the rear upright, same thing. Now the long pin in the rear. Take a 1.5mm and tight the set screw gently. Put some joint grease on top of the blade, and now it goes into the diff out drive. Put the camber link on top. Next step is the assembly of the roll bars. So I will take the roll bar stopper and put the set screw inside. Make sure that the roll bar stopper is exactly in the middle of the roll bar. And the roll bar has 2 dots, so you can easily see where you are. For the rear, the initial setup is 1.2 mm and the front roll bar is 1.3 mm. Now we're gonna assemble the roll bars on the car. First I have to put the bearings in the roll bar holders. Put the roll bar holder onto the roll bar and note there's a left side and a right side. Now I will install the front roll bar and check if the roll bar is free. We will do the same for the rear and tight it with a 2.5 mm screw. So now I will assemble the roll bar linkage and I will attach the ball end to the ball joint, and I do that with the pliers and check if it goes smooth. Now I will attach the ball end to the ball joint and the initial setup is 28 mm. And now I will attach the roll bar linkage onto the suspension arm and make sure it's free. Attach the ball joint now with the set screw on the roll bar and tight gently. And do that the same for the other side. And now check if the roll bar is working freely. And do that the same for the front roll bar and check if everything is working free.